Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Dream Big podcast. I'm really looking forward to this year. And for a lot of you, you're coming out of a season it's so busy and filled with all kinds of emotions from happy to sad, a little ambivalent in between. And so today I thought to kick things off for the year, Arthur Brooks is joining us. Arthur, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about you. I know you are like the king of happiness. So tell us a little bit about not only the science in your studies around happiness, but some of the workshops you've done. Just introduce us a little bit to you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's the King of Happiness is a pretty nice title. It's probably not too accurate. The truth is there are a lot of people who actually study it, and that's what I do. I'm a social scientist dedicated to the art and science of getting happier. I teach a class at the Harvard Business School called Leadership and Happiness. My background intellectually is I'm a behavioral social scientist. My PhD is in looking at, research was always in looking at people and why they do the weird things that they do. And I wound up, as I made my way through my career, focusing on human happiness because it's the thing that everybody wants the most, including me. My goal in doing my work, I write books. I write a column in the Atlantic about the science of happiness for about 500,000 people a week. I do a lot of public speaking and make videos, et cetera, because I'm dedicated to the public education on this point, is because I have a personal mission, which is to lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love using science and ideas. I do that because I want to glorify God and I want to serve others and I want to have a really good time. And studying and writing and speaking and talking about happiness really fits that bill.
Oh, man, you are speaking the language of the people that tune into this podcast. I wouldn't call the people, everybody that tunes in, like happiness junkies, but just this side of it. But there's a difference between happiness, like just yippee skippy and waving your arms, and a deeper, profound joy in the underlying roots of this. Talk to us a little bit about some of your studies and some of these things you found, because people that are listening are thinking, okay, Bob, I want to be happy. Help us dig a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at the surface level, a lot of people, everybody knows they want to be happier, but most people don't even know how to define happiness. And really an inquiry into the serious business of happiness starts with a definition. So when I ask people to define it, my students on the first day of class, they always talk about their feelings. It's how I feel when I'm with the people that I love, or it's how I feel when I'm doing the things that I enjoy. And I say, wrong. Feelings are not happiness. Feelings are evidence of happiness, kind of like the smell of the turkey is evidence of the Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, you would not want to substitute the smell for the actual Thanksgiving dinner. That would be very disappointing. And all of us should not be content with feelings, nor should we be chasing feelings. That's not the way to do it. A proper understanding of happiness is that it's a combination of three phenomena: enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. Those are the three things that we need in balance and abundance to have on net the greatest level of well-being in our lives. And so that's what I study. I study enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. And there's lots that goes into that. For example, we know that happiness on this side of heaven is not attainable. It's not a destination. It's actually a direction, which is very important. We also find studying this that Mother Nature doesn't really care if you're happy. So if it feels good, do it is the absolute best way to ruin your life.
Yeah.
All of these weird things. And last but not least, that if you want to have a happier life, you need to come to terms with the reality and the sacredness of your own suffering. So there's actually nothing wrong with unhappiness if you want to live a happier life. That's the kind of stuff that I dig into in my work.
And so take us a little bit deeper on these ideas of, purpose. People are trying to figure out what they're going to do for a career. And I would say instead, let's focus on your character. Let's talk about who you want to become, what legacy you want to leave. When you open the door and you can just smell the cookies in the oven. Like I want to leave that kind of aroma with people. And it won't be just arm waving that gets us there. But a keen sense of purpose and living in constant anticipation. The people that I've found are the happiest seem to be living in constant anticipation. Tell me about what you found.
Well, so again, the macronutrients of happiness are these weird things called enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. And each one of these things has to be unpacked a little bit because they're not self-evident. You actually just articulated a couple of facets of a couple of these macronutrients. let's start with enjoyment, might as well. People think that they want to really enjoy their lives, and indeed you need to enjoy your life to have a happy life, but that's not the same thing as getting pleasure. One of the greatest mistakes that people make in our society, probably always have, is pursuing pleasure as opposed to enjoyment. Pleasure is a brain phenomenon. It's actually from the limbic system that was developed over a 40 million year period to give us information about what's going on in the outside. And all pleasure is a signal from your brain saying this is a good way to get calories or mates.
Yeah.
That's no way to live. Hitting the pleasure lever and over and over and over again, especially with the human ingenuity that's gone into creating pleasure-making substances. They can be very evil and wicked and bad for us, like fentanyl and pornography are perfect examples of ways that we've been able to kind of perfect the pleasure machine and ruin people's lives in the process. Enjoyment is a much more human thing, where we take sources of pleasure, but we add two things. We add people and memory so that we can experience that in called the prefrontal cortex of our brain, the executive center, the C-suite of our brains. We add the love of people around us and love of the divine, and we can remember this. And in so doing, we make it fully human and less animal. So here's the basic way to think about it, Bob. And here's how I talk about it with my students. If there's something that gives you pleasure and it cocould be addictive, never do it alone. That's what it comes down to. Because if you're doing it alone, you're doing it wrong. If you like to eat a whole lot of junky food and you hole up in your apartment and do it by yourself, you drink a 12-pack of beer, or you're looking at pornography, you're doing it wrong. That's searching for pleasure, and it will never bring you enjoyment. So therefore, it will never bring you happiness. Now, that's kind of in a nutshell how you can use neuroscience, social science, and even some philosophy and theology, one handy-dandy package, to get yourself a strategy toward greater happiness. And that's just one of those macronutrients. You asked more about the meaning parts and the satisfaction part. We can talk about that next if you like.
Yeah, please.
So satisfaction is the second of the macronutrients of happiness. And satisfaction is the joy that we get after struggle. Humans are so funny. If we don't struggle for things, we don't care about them very much. If my students cheat on my exam to get an A in my class, they don't get any satisfaction from the A. But if they work really hard and they get an A, it's tremendously joy-provoking. We need to work toward goals. We are striving creatures to create real value. And creating value requires some effort. It requires some struggle, sometimes even some sacrifice, sometimes even some pain. So what we find is that when people have these big and little goals, but they're struggling and striving to get them, they get a whole lot of satisfaction when they get them. Now, the problem is that when we arrive, it can be very disappointing. And there's a reason for that. The human brain tends us towards something called homeostasis, which is getting accustomed really quickly to your new state of affairs. If you're angry, you don't stay angry forever because you have to be ready for the next set of circumstances. If you're joyful, it's the same deal. For that matter, if you get off the treadmill at the gym, your pulse has to go back to where it was so you can be ready for the next exertion. Homeostasis always takes you back to the baseline, but people never figure that out because, once again, Mother Nature, she doesn't care if you're happy, and she lies all the time. She says that if you get that car, you'll enjoy it the rest of your life. If you move from Boston, where I live, to San Diego, where you live, that you'll be warm and wonderful for the rest of your life. And the truth is, you'll get used to it really, really fast. So the result of that is that life is kind of this hedonic treadmill, run, and never quite figuring it out, unless we actually do something that's actually kind of biblical, which is to start thinking about wanting what we have as opposed to having what we want. Real satisfaction is sort of all the things you have divided by all the things that you want. And the real strategy is not just having more. Sometimes it's actually wanting less from the world. And that's one of the things that I talk about an awful lot, about how to have a more satisfying life that's ongoing. That's number two.
Boy, this is just so good, because I know a lot of people that listen to the podcast, Faith Guides Their Steps. For a lot of people, it doesn't. They just enjoy the conversations. Like, until you're a man of faith, as am I, how do you connect happiness and faith as people are trying to connect what they believe in a God that they may adopt a worldview, that there's a God that cares about us individually and personally.
Right.
And then it gets really kind of bollocksed up because they're trying to figure out, is this a sign? Is this a sign?
Right.
Talk to us about some of your studies there.
So I have done a lot of work on the habits of the happiest people, and this is before we even get to the biggest macronutrient of all, which is meaning, and that's going to be really bound up with faith and philosophy and the transcendent in a big way. But as I've studied over the years about the habits of the happiest people, people often think that the habits of the happiest people are going to be money and power and pleasure and fame. Those are all wrong. Those are idols. Those are distractions from actual happiness. The four habits of the happiest people are faith, family, friends, and work that serves others. That's it. That's the checklist.
Mm.
Those are the things to be paying attention to every single day. That's the thing when you examine your conscience before you lay your head on the pillow every night and say, did I do something for my faith or life philosophy? Not necessarily my and your faith. What about family life? What about my friendships? And did my work serve other people in a meaningful way? The first of these, faith, is really interesting because I've done a lot of research on, on the role of faith. And what you find is that faith, really what I mean by that is a sense of the transcendent. See, here's the deal, Bob. If you are left up to your devices, Mother Nature will make you completely obsessed with the psychodrama of your life where you're the star.
Yes.
And I'm
The
telling
camera
you,
is always on you.
oh, it's called the spotlight effect in social psychology, as a matter of fact. And it's just so tedious. It's like watching the same episode of Succession over and over and over again, where you're the star. The first time it's okay. The second time you're like, by the 20th time you're reciting the lines, but you're stuck like the end of A Clockwork Orange with your eyes,
Yes.
pulled open to
Yes.
watch this terrible drama going on around you. Again, my job, my money, my commute, my disputes, you need to get small and the world needs to get big. The universe needs to get big around you. And the only way that you can do that is with transcendence. Now, I'm not going to tell you which form of transcendence is cosmically or metaphysically right, but I will tell you that there are lots of ways for transcendence to make you happy, happier at least. One of them is to start a meditation practice. Another is to walk without devices in nature before dawn. Another is to study the works of Johann Sebastian Bach. Another is to read the Stoic philosophers. For me, I go to Mass every morning. Every morning, 6:50 in the morning, I go to Mass because that's the faith of my youth. And that's the transcendent experience that actually gives me that benefit, which also I tend to find to be metaphysically quite sound, as you would
I thought
say.
about these four ideas: love, purpose, connections, and a few authentic relationships. A lot of what you've found in your studies, no doubt adjacent to it, is community.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
speak to us about finding a couple authentic relationships, like people where you can get super real with, and you can just say, I don't care what it looks like. Let's just talk about what it is right now. That idea of being known and all the risks that are
Yeah.
associated with that.
So remember that there's four habits: faith, family, friends, and work. Family and friends are the intimate relationships, or the source of the intimate relationships that you need to be a happy person, as happy as your lot will allow. And there's one relationship that crosses both of those pillars, and that's your marriage. Your marriage is both family and friends. Why? Because the happiest marriages are deep friendships. It's called companionate love. And they're also family relationships at the same time because you're building your family together. Now, family is very mystical. These are the relationships, except for your spouse, that you didn't choose, but they're very important to you. Even if you're not speaking to your family, that's a source of pain because these are hardwired relationships. And, I believe that comes from God. Other people believe it just comes from evolutionary biology. One way or the other, it's really important. And we understand the neurophysiology of that. There's a neuropeptide that functions as a hormone in the human brain called oxytocin, which you get from eye contact and touch, especially from your kin. And that's really, really important, that people actually need to be happier. The other is friendship, which is incredibly intimate but chosen. And the biggest problem that we have in our society today is loneliness. This is one of the great crises that we have in our world today, not because we don't have a lot of people around us, but because our friendships have gone from real friends to deal friends and virtual friends. Not good enough. Deal friendship, not good enough. Virtual friendship, not good enough. You need real friends in real life, is what it comes down to.
And then
And what
real
you
life
need,
shared
what's that?
experiences.
Yeah. That's what it comes down to. Now, the happiest people in adulthood, they have one or two, usually two at least, very intimate friendships where people just love them. Real friends are useless friends. Now, what do I mean? Deal friends are useful friends.
I like
Useless
that. I
friends,
haven't heard that name before, but I know it's really appropriate.
it's what Aristotle, when he talks about atelic relationships, where that means they don't have a telos, where the telos means the purpose, purposeless, useless friendships. That's really critical. People just love you. They don't need you for their career. They don't need you for their social stature, and vice versa. So this is really critically important. The happiest people, they tend to be married and have at least one really close friend, is what you find. Those are the characteristics that they have. And then they also have family relationships with whom they can, I mean, family relationships are often not as intimate as friendships, but they're really important that we actually maintain them. And the reason for that is what I call the 3 a.m. phone call. You know, I'll say, who's the person who drove you craziest from your family at Thanksgiving? It'll be like Aunt Marge. She won't stop talking about Trump. Either she loves him or hates him, whatever,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I say, yeah, would Aunt Marge take your 3 a.m. phone call? They're like, oh, yeah, of course. Like, there you go. Right.
Bingo.
And that person you love hanging out with from work at the bar, would they take your 3 a.m. phone call? Probably not. Well, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, and speak a little bit to, we're going to go into a challenging season of ideas. There's always current events happening and challenging world events. It's easier to identify sometimes with issues and get passionate about an issue than to take time for a person.
Right.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, if we lived nearby, we'd be hanging out.
Yeah, for sure.
Like we would be like sharing experiences and we'd get into some mischief and probably something less than a misdemeanor. But that idea of shared experiences rather than make your friendship based upon an issue or an ideology.
Yeah.
Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the important things is shared loves. And shared loves has to do with things that you actually do together, kind of a parallel play kind of thing. Women typically, the shared things that they talk about are relationships that are dear to them. And they talk an awful lot about relationships and feelings. Men, it's often around particular activities. This is what we see often, building birdhouses or going to baseball games. I can see that you're a Boston Red Sox fan. And, that kind of thing is really important. And that's the kind of mischief you get into, whether it's, clean or maybe a little bit less so. That's the sort of fun that you have where the shared love that you have together is what bonds you together with that other person. And that's critically important. Now, the category of stuff that doesn't go into that typically is a shared animus or hatred or suspicion or hostility or contempt toward other people, or an undue interest in, political controversy. That kind of crowds out the sort of shared loves that we're talking about. Sure, maybe if you're just a political aficionado and you really like looking at poll results, fine. But if you're really super into yelling at the TV and feeling angry and aggrieved all the time, that's going to crowd out the love in your friendships.
Yeah, bingo.
It's going to make it harder for you to do that. It's kind of a bad cult, is what it is, and it's one of the three big reasons that happiness has been so in decline over the last 20 years of American life. The first being social media, the second being the coronavirus epidemic, and the third being hatred that actually comes from political controversy. Cancel culture is what comes. This is one of the reasons that happiness has been falling all over the world, but most especially in the United States.
Tell me about this, because I know we need to wrap up. Some practical pointers for people. You gave us a couple: a walk in nature, lose the screen. I think of things about having an intentional conversation over the weekend. Some friends went out to dinner. I'm not much of a foodie. I would just be like, you give me stale bread and I'd be happy. But they were at this nice restaurant and everybody was enjoying the food and talking about it, which is great. However, I wanted to change the conversation. I wanted to go a little deeper. I wanted to talk about how people interact with life. Like, how did you come from the factory? Just being curious about how somebody perceives the world and how do you interact with it. And tell us about some intentional steps people can take to drive their conversations deeper so they can experience some of the camaraderie in the community that will lead towards happiness.
Yeah, well, that's a good place to leave this conversation. Might be actually on that last macronutrient of happiness, which is meaning, and how to find it, and what are the questions you should ask yourself to find your sense of meaning, and at your next dinner party, ask others. This will lead to deeper relationships and probe into people's happiness, and it can very much deepen the friendships that you have with others, but help you in your own way as well. Meaning in life is the most perplexing of the parts of happiness, because I can go pretty long without enjoyment and satisfaction, but I can't go an hour without meaning and
Mm.
actually classify myself as a happy person. It can't be done. Meaning really has three parts to it. It's not good enough to say what's the meaning of life. That's too broad a question. But meaning really is about coherence, why things happen the way that they do, about purpose, which is a subcategory of meaning, where purpose is my life's direction and my goals. And last but not least is my life's significance, which is, why does it matter that I'm alive? The way to figure out if you have a crisis of meaning, and the questions to search for answers to, are really twofold. I found in my research that people who have a strong sense of meaning in their life, they have very easy answers to these questions, and people who have a meaning crisis don't. You want to play the
Yeah, come on. Let's
want my
go.
meaning game. So Bob, let me start with the first question. Why are you alive?
My worldview is to honor God and to love the people he made.
So your answer to the why am I alive question is because God made me to serve.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
If I can paraphrase that, because you just gave me two answers, which is who made me and why he made me.
Yeah.
Right.
Love God, love the people he made.
Okay. So here's a different question. Question number two. For what would you be willing to die today?
For someone to live a significantly different and better life.
Anybody?
It would be somebody that I have interacted in a way where I could make that calculus, I think, that this would be a meaningful sacrifice.
So you would die such that others could truly live.
Yes.
And then the question is, when push comes to shove and they said, okay, Bob, time's up, you might be like, whoa, I didn't mean him, but I get it. It's a tricky thing for sure. You have answers. You have classically Christian answers to the meaning question, which is where you find your meaning in life. People find it in different places, but what I find with young adults, but also people our age as well, is when they don't have answers to the questions, they feel at loose ends. And looking for their answers is really important. And at your next dinner party at a nice restaurant, have people give those answers to those questions. I remember when my adult son, I have three adult children in their 20s at this point, and my middle son is 23. He just got out of the Marine Corps. He was a sniper in the Marine Corps, and I remember as a teenager to an adult when he found his answers. He wouldn't have had answers to this when he was a teenager, and he was rootless and insecure. And now I say, Carlos, why are you alive? And he would say, just like you, because God made me to serve others. And for what are you willing to die? And he would say, for my Christian faith, for the Catholic Church, for my fellow Marines, and for the United States of America. Mic drop. Solid answers, son. Now, These are not the answers of everybody watching and listening to us, but those are good answers. And those are the kinds of answers molded to our own lives that we need to, not to invent, but to discover. And that will bring us happiness.
And you don't want to borrow an answer, because then you would have something off the shelf to plug in because it's the right answer. But as you're listening and this is provoking you, that you're thinking, what do I really, really feel about this? Like, what is the real answer? I love in the scriptures, there's a dad, I can so relate with him. In Mark 9, he says, I believe, just help all my unbelief, all the parts I can't get to and access yet. So having authenticity in the answers to yourself, so that we're not just checking a box. Well, you've got Arthur, books and workshops. Give us a little overview. People I know are going to want more. Everybody on my entire staff wants more already. They're lining up. How can people connect with you? What are some of the books that you would say, hey, this would be a great introduction towards this? Here's some workshops that would be helpful.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. So I have a website called arthurbrooks.com. Everybody has a website. Everybody and their mom has a website today. But at arthurbrooks.com, you can find all the things that I write. Every Thursday morning, I have a column, 1,200 words on the science of happiness at The Atlantic, which is a wonderful idea magazine. I write books. My latest book is called Build the Life You Want, The Art and Science of Getting Happier, which is the basics of happiness science, which I co-authored with Oprah Winfrey. that came out last September, and it's, still hot on the shelves, and it's still selling really well, and you can find it almost any place, as a matter of fact, and some samples of it on my website as well. You can even take a little workshop. You can even do a little workshop in 10 video parts on my website. Just sign up for the workshop, and I'll talk to you more about the science of happiness and all the ways that you can use it with actually practical lessons. And on the website, you can actually find all kinds of cool stuff to download and test to take. And my goal is for everybody to get happier, to make it their hobby, and most importantly, to pass it on. Because once we do that, this can be a game changer for all of us and maybe make our world a better place.
I have done a lot of podcasts, and I'm looking over at Stephanie here, and she's just grinning from ear to ear as well. There have been a lot of podcasts we've done, and I cannot think of one that just makes me more engaged and joyful than I felt like I met a new friend. So thank you. Thanks for living a life that's just beautiful, that is so outward focused, and then so inclusive of people wherever you're coming at in your faith expression and experience, that you would take some of these things, and if faith guides your steps, just go to Jesus with this stuff. If you're kind of like all the above or none of the above, still take all the best parts of this and say, hey, what's my next courageous step? Arthur, thank you very much. You guys, you've been listening to the Dream Big podcast. I hope this blew your mind, because if it didn't, you don't have a pulse.
Thank you, Bob.
Hey, I'll talk to you later. Thanks a million, Arthur.
God bless you, and God bless everybody watching us. Stay happy.